So we're going to be covering polymers and plastics. So polymers and plastics are actually related to each other. Polymers are long chain molecules composed of individual repeating units called monomers. Some of the more important natural polymers include starches, proteins, and DNA. And then synthetic polymers include PVC, styrofoam, nylon, and plexiglass. So you might have a basic question like, what is the difference between polymers and plastics? So polymers are what we're talking about here. They're made up of individual small molecules, but plastics are actually made of polymers, and they don't have to be the same polymer, and you can have additives in plastics. So a plastic is made of polymers, and so some plastics are directly polymers, but they don't have to be. They could be mixtures of polymers. They could be polymers that have been linked together in some way. So basically all plastics are made from polymers, but polymers aren't necessarily plastics because you don't necessarily add anything to them or cross-link them in any way or add mixtures to them and things like that. So it's a subtle difference. Most people think they're the same thing, but polymers are really what plastics are made out of. Okay, so what I wanted to show you really quickly is how easily polymers' properties can be changed by their structure. So what I have shown here is a short segment of amylose. And if you look at amylose, what you'll see is that it's made up of repeating units of this molecule here. And that's a polymer that's created from glucose. So this actually is glucose. So amylose is a polymer of glucose linked end to end like this. Now, what's interesting about glucose is if you think about Vesper theory, like this angle that's here puts these two big molecules together. So really what should be happening is this angle should be 109 degrees. If you actually did that, you can sort of see how this would start to curve around. And in fact, the three-dimensional structure for amylose is shown here. It's actually an alpha helix when it finally settles down and forms something in solution. This is actually from a picture from Science Direct, this one down here. And they have these little subtopics, and this particular topic is just amylose. On the other hand, if you take cellulose, cellulose is also made of glucose. Now, notice the end unit here. It's a little bit different. With the main difference, you can highlight if you just take focus on this oxygen. Change that color so you can see it actually. Might be too light to see. That oxygen and that oxygen, right? In glucose, this oxygen is pointing down all the time. And, in amylose, that oxygen is pointing down. In cellulose, it's actually pointing up. So since it's pointing up, right, when it connects to this oxygen on another glucose or this oxygen on another glucose, what ends up happening is you sort of get this stair-step effect. So the only difference is that glucose can actually be formed two different ways. One is with this oxygen in the down position, and this or in the up position. That's the other one. And so depending on how you polymerize it, and in biology this is all done with enzymes, so depending on how you polymerize it, you can either get amylose or you can get cellulose. Now, you're probably familiar with the idea that amylose is part of starch, and starches are what we can eat. Cellulose is actually the main component of cell wall material, and humans actually lack the enzyme to digest that. One of the things about cellulose in all polymers is that they're actually very durable, and that's why plants make their cell walls out of it. What actually happens in cellulose is that, again, considering stability of this molecule, every other glucose molecule flips over. So we get one in the up and then one going down and one going up and one going down. The net effect is what happens to the molecule is it looks like this. And these actually make linear chains, which then can cross-link by hydrogen bonding to another chain. So this additional intermolecular force, because of the size of the molecule, your book says because they're longer, right? Because they are longer, they have more opportunities to hydrogen bond with another chain, and as a result, they have very high melting points, have very high boiling points. They're very durable, hard to break apart. And this is why we use like synthetic polymers in order to make plastics and things like that, because of their durability. So one form of synthetic polymer is made from ethylene. Okay, this is known as ethylene. It's actually the same. This ethylene unit is actually a plant ripening hormone. So it's the same compound that is used for producing ripening in like tomatoes and things like that. So they'll actually use ethylene gas to ripen up or give fruit the appearance of being ripe in a store. But ethylene can be polymerized end to end in what's called an addition polymer. Basically, you just keep adding units to it, and you can see the units. Now, with this one, it's hard to tell where the units break apart, but the ethylene units basically bond end to end to form something called polyethylene. So, if you remember in our discussions of molecules, right, if you have two molecules with the same molecular weight, but one molecule is got branching on it, that it has groups coming out of the side instead of all being in a row, that has a tendency to lower its melting point and lower its boiling point, because it weakens the ability for the molecules to come into contact with each other, so less net intermolecular force. So we have two types of polyethylene. We have high density polyethylene, and high density polyethylene is essentially long chains of polyethylene that look like this. But it turns out that, and so high density polyethylene has high density and good strength and is heat resistant. And we make things like milk jugs out of it, things that are a little stiffer. If you felt the plastic on a milk jug, you'll notice that it's not soft, right? But then we can produce also something called low density polyethylene, which has branching in the chain. So instead of being one continuous linear chain, it has branches coming off of it. And this actually lowers the ability for the molecules to come into contact with each other. And so you get lower density, less strength, but it's also much more flexible. So when we take low density polyethylene and we make something out of it, that material, right, is much more flexible. And so we commonly see these things in plastic bags. So just like you would expect for smaller molecules, the linearity of the molecule, if it's very linear, it has stronger intermolecular interactions, and as a result, it gives it like higher boiling points. It packs better, so it makes more dense materials, and that's what we see in milk jugs. And then stuff that's branched or bumpy or irregular shaped on the molecular level tends to have lower melting points and tends to be softer and more flexible. So another class of polymers which are related to polyethylene are created from what are called substituted polyethylenes. This monomer down here, known as chloroethylene, is also known as vinyl chloride. Vinyl is the term given to anything attached to a carbon that's been double bonded. So vinyl chloride is just a very old name. So when you make a polymer to this from vinyl chloride, and there's a couple of ways to do it, but an addition polymer is a very common way. You'll notice you can see, because of the substitution on the polyethylene, you can see how the monomers are joined together. So this is an example of polyvinyl chloride, or PVC, right, which is made from vinyl chloride. Vinyl chloride, the polyvinyl chloride has the benefit of being very strong and rigid, but it does actually in many instances need what's called a plasticizer in it. And the plasticizers that are used are typically phthalates. Now, until recently, well, I should say recently, what they've done is they've gone to very high molecular weight phthalates to act as the lubricant between the chains of the molecule. And this allows the PVC to be a little bit more flexible. So plasticizers are something that's really important to be aware of. The actual evidence that they cause human harm is kind of mixed. I think it really depends on which group that you listen to. But the plasticizers most commonly used are made from phthalates. So if you remember KHP from our titrations that we did for the acid-base titrations, KHP is a phthalate. But the phthalates that are used and that's an inorganic phthalate, very water soluble, but the phthalates that are used as plasticizers can't be inorganic. They can't be ionic in nature because they have to mix into the plastic structure. So these are organic phthalates, and the organic phthalates are believed to be involved in endocrine disruption, which causes birth defects, how to say it? It disrupts the endocrine cycle because of its structure. And if you have any interest in that kind of stuff, I've included a couple of links down here from relatively reputable sources. One is from the CDC. It's actually, phthalates are actually something that we monitor on a regular basis. And what we found is that phthalate metabolites, the products of phthalate decomposition in your body, are found at higher concentrations actually in women than in men, because phthalates are also found in a lot of other products like shampoos and makeups and things that we put on our skin. Do they have a real effect or not? That's really something that's not like my training, right? But it's something that I'm aware of and I sort of pay attention to. If I can use glass, for example, as a container, I much prefer to use glass for my food containers. But still, you have plastic lids, right? So you have to just be aware of what's going on. But yeah, be aware that there's things called plasticizers. And this is actually an article showing the effects of plasticizers in embryonic development in humans. And a lot of this is relatively recent. This is an article from only 2 years ago. So we know that it has some effect at very high concentrations. The question is, what effect is it having on the human population now? We don't really know. It could be implicated, for example, in sterility in men, but I kind of think that's kind of a joke because we always find things in men before we find things in women because, I don't know, it just seems unfair, but just the way it is. So that's the idea, though, that PVC is one of the most important plastics that we have, but there are some things we worry about even with things like PVC, including these things we call plasticizers. So if you're interested in more information, you can probably take a look at that stuff there. And finally, in the category of polymers, polymers can be made up of two kinds of monomers, and we call these things copolymers. So we take two monomeric units and we link them together to produce like this dimer unit here, and then you can add another one to it and you can make it longer and longer and longer. So this is what we call a copolymer. This one is known as a condensation polymer simply because when you put the two together, right, what comes out of it? A small molecule, right? This is water in this case. And condensation in its technical form simply means you eliminate a small group of atoms during the polymerization process. So when you pull out one small group of atoms, that would be a molecule, right? When you pull a molecule out of it, that's known as a condensation reaction. This one, it makes sense because it's water and it should be condensation because it's water coming out, but that's not where the definition comes from. But yeah, condensation reaction is another way that we can produce polymers, in this case a copolymer.